In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to replace the water pump in this 2005 Toyota Camry with the 4-cylinder 2.4 liter engine. The water pump is located right below the alternator, right there, but first we need to drain all of the coolant out of the radiator. Underneath the car, in the center of the radiator, there is this drain valve. I've jacked up the car a little bit so I can fit a gallon jug underneath, and I'm just going to open that up. And just as a precaution, since we will be moving the alternator out of the way, I'm going to disconnect the negative battery terminal, just so we don't create any arcing or sparking later on. With that done, it's time to remove the belt. So we're going to be using a 19mm socket on this right here, which is the belt tensioner. So I've got my 19mm socket on a breaker bar, and I'm going to rotate this clockwise, nice and slowly. Now this is a hydraulic tensioner, so just a firm pressure is going to do the trick, and it will just slowly go. It won't go all at once like a spring. Once you've created enough slack on the belt, you can pull it over the top of the alternator. Now, if you're going to be replacing the belt, you can completely remove it from here. Otherwise, you can just take a bungee cord and put some tension on it, get it out of the way, and try to keep it on as many pulleys as possible. Later in this video, I will show you the proper belt routing, so don't worry about not knowing how to put it back. If your belt's looking like this, though, it's probably time to replace it. Now we can remove the alternator, which is held on by a 14mm bolt up top, right there, and a 12mm that's hard to show, but it's underneath there. This is what that 12mm looks like underneath the alternator. Now we just have a few wiring connectors to unplug. This one just squeezes and unplugs. And then the same thing down on the AC compressor. Now you should be able to wiggle the alternator loose. Just flip it up out of the way. Now if you follow the wire down from this plug, it clips into a bracket that goes right in between the pulley and the water pump. You can just pull that wire out of that bracket and just move it out of the way. Now the pulley on the water pump has to come off. There are 4 12mm bolts holding that on. And notice on 2 sides there is a hole in the pulley. Now there is a special tool to hold this pulley so you can loosen the nuts. But what I did is just use a punch, or you could even use a screwdriver to jam in there just like this. So just put the punch in that hole, rotate it to the left. And it holds the pulley in place just as you break them loose. And then they should all come out easily or by hand after that. Now once all of those bolts are out, you can wiggle the pulley back and forth and it'll come off. This one took a fair amount of wiggling because of the corrosion that had built up around here. It was tough to get out through the pulley, but it came off. Now that right there is our water pump, and we can look at our new water pump and orient it in the same way to see where all of the bolts are going to have to come out. Now these are just 10mm bolts, and even though you drained the coolant, you can expect more to drip out or gush out when you remove the water pump. So make sure to put a catch pan or something underneath. Now take note on the top here that this one is a bolt, but this one is a stud. And both of these hold on this channel that the wire sits in. So put that aside and just remember where that goes. This one directly to the left of the pulley hub is also a stud. So with that one, the whole stud came out with a nut. Not a problem. The main thing is you just don't want to break anything off. Now with all the bolts or nuts off, the water pump breaks free and definitely some more coolant spilled. But there it is. Now I can remove the gasket. See, I think right around there is where it was leaking. So I cleaned up the mating surface with some brake cleaner and Scotch-Brite. Now I have the gasket and the new pump. And I've just got one screw through the hole there. And then I'm going to go on to the stud. Then I'll have 2 points of contact holding the gasket in place. Now all the rest of the studs and nuts or the screws can go back on. These top 2 I'll do last because I have to reinsert this wire guide here. So the nut and stud for one, and then the bolt for the uppermost one. Now that I've got all the nuts and bolts started, I'm going to torque them all down to 80 inch-pounds. Now this wire can be tucked back into the holder here. And the pulley can be reinstalled on the new pump. And go ahead and just finger tighten the pulley bolts. Now these bolts can be tightened back down in the same way that we got them loose. You can insert the pin, do 2 of them, then twist it 180 degrees, insert the pin in the other hole, and do the other 2. Now we're ready to rotate the alternator back down into place. And we can plug in the 2 electrical connectors. There's 1. And here's 2. Start both the 14mm and the 12mm alternator bolt by hand. And then tighten them down. Now you can reinstall the belt or a new belt, and it should look like this diagram. Get the belt around every pulley except for the alternator, and then get your breaker bar back on to the tensioner, and slowly release tension. Then you can get the belt around the alternator. Once you have the belt back on, make sure that the ribs of the belt are sitting on each pulley perfectly, that it's not hanging off front or back on any of the ribbed pulleys. Take a flashlight and inspect that carefully. Now, of course, you want to close the drain on the bottom of your radiator. Then you can fill your radiator with coolant and your overflow expansion tank with coolant. And then the last thing to do is to reconnect the negative battery terminal. Now you can start the vehicle and let it run and get up to operating temperature and continue to check the coolant levels. Check the coolant levels periodically as air bubbles might bleed out of the system and you'll need to add more coolant to the radiator or the overflow expansion tank. As always, thank you for watching. Please like the video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here are a few more videos I think you might enjoy.